Welcome, everyone. I'm Randy May, president of the Free State Foundation, and I'm excited that you're all here today and grateful for that. So first of all, I hope everyone had a happy, safe Thanksgiving, wonderful Thanksgiving with your family and friends. In just a moment, I'm going to give a proper introduction to our distinguished speaker here, NTIA Administrator Arielle Roth, and also to our two panelists, distinguished in their own right. In September, when we were honored to have FCC Commissioner Olivia Trusty deliver one of her first major addresses, I pointed out that all things equal, I always like to host Free State Foundation events in the First Amendment room. I guess all things are equal because here we are again. And I said then, and I'll just say it again, since I founded the Free State Foundation in 2006, we've always taken defending free speech protected by the First Amendment to be an important part of our mission, and that always will be the case. Now, to the main business at hand. I first asked Arielle whether she would be a featured speaker at an FSF event last spring when there were just rumors of her possible nomination. Strangely enough, she said, "Randy, I think I should wait until I'm nominated." So as soon as she was nominated, she received another email from me renewing the invitation, and this time she replied, "Randy, I think I should wait until I'm confirmed by the Senate." So shortly after Arielle was confirmed by the Senate, she had waiting in her inbox another email from me renewing the invitation. This time she replied, "Randy, I think I should wait until I'm sworn into office and unpack my bags." Well, right after I got word that happened, my next email said, "Time's up," and here we are today. I probably first met Arielle close to 2 decades ago. I don't remember the exact month or year, but close to 2 decades ago. And after a brief conversation, I knew right then and there that I'd met someone who was likely to play an important role in formulating communications policy. And boy, was I right. But I'm going to give you the details because they're relevant to what I just said about what's happened since I first met Arielle. She was sworn in as an Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications Information on July 30th, 2025, and in this role she serves as Administrator of National Telecommunications Information Administration, NTIA, the executive branch principally responsible for advising the President on communications, broadband, internet policy. So she's got two important titles, unlike most of us. Arielle, which one of those two titles do you prefer? Okay, and I should maybe apologize, but because I've known NTIA Administrator Roth so long, if she doesn't object, I'm going to refer to her as Arielle, but she does have those two important titles. So prior to joining NTIA, Administrator Roth spent nearly a decade shaping federal communications and broadband policy, holding senior roles on Capitol Hill and at the FCC. Most recently, she served as policy director for telecommunications on the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation under Chairman Ted Cruz, and previously as legislative counsel to the former Senator Roy Blunt. And at the FCC, Arielle served as wireline legal advisor to former Commissioner Michael O'Reilly and as legal advisor to the chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau. And earlier in her career, she was a legal fellow with the Hudson's Institute Center for Economics of the Internet, Center for Economics of the Internet. And she holds degrees from the University of Toronto and a law degree from McGill University. Those of you that attend many Free State Foundation events or even occasionally know that it's rare that I will give someone such a full informal introduction, but I think in this case it demonstrates what I said about the progression and increasingly important positions that Administrator Roth has held in order to make her ideally suited to fulfill her role now as administrator. Now, I'm just going to say we're fortunate and I'm grateful to have the aforementioned Michael O'Reilly here with Deb Colliers. So for them, I'm just going to not do the formality here, but I'll say with regard to Mike, he's a former commissioner and now heads up NTIA O'Reilly Consulting. And the thing that comes to mind about Mike, I just spent Thanksgiving with my children and grandchildren. I don't know whether any of you have had this experience, but my grandchildren are always asking me, who's your favorite grandchild? That's who's your favorite grandchild? So I have several evasive answers to that question. But if anyone asked me who my favorite FCC commissioner would be, I'm not going to get in a lot of trouble here, but I'll just put it this way. That Mike O'Reilly is like I answer my grandchildren. He is one of my very most favorite former commissioners. Deb Collier, I've known for a long time. She's one of the real experts on telecom policy, broadband policy here in Washington. She also had a distinguished career, as you'll see, up on the Hill as well. So all of our speakers have, and she brings that expertise now to her current position. One other thing, just please tweet, okay? I think it's on the bio sheet, but it's hashtag FSA Arielle Roth. We'd be happy for you to Twitter away. So with that, please join me in welcoming Administrator Roth, please.
What a kind introduction, and what an honor it is to be here at the National Press Club among so many thought leaders and colleagues. I'm grateful to the Free State Foundation and Randy May for his leadership and persistence in inviting me to speak to you today, and for the remarkably subtle, understated, barely noticeable publicity devoted to this event over the last 3 months. So truly, Randy, no pressure at all for me up here. For decades, Free State has championed the bedrock principles that underpin American flourishing: limited government, free markets, and respect for the rule of law. From my earliest days in telecom law, Free State scholarship and conferences challenged how I thought about these issues. I've learned a tremendous amount from their work, and Free State's analysis continues to inform how I approach my own responsibilities as NTIA Administrator. That certainly applies to my current work overseeing the $42 billion BEAD program and ensuring it fulfills its core mission of ensuring broadband availability throughout the country. For almost 4 years, BEAD was weighed down by bureaucratic red tape, market-distorting restrictions, and heavy-handed extra-legal social mandates. A major bipartisan initiative was at risk of becoming yet another broadband program that failed to deliver. But new leadership makes a difference. In just a few short months, the Trump administration transformed BEAD from a boondoggle built on unlawful rules into a genuine success for the American people. Under Secretary Lutnick's leadership, our benefit of the bargain reforms restored the program to its statutory objective: universal connectivity delivered through competition, accountability, and respect for the law. The result has been lower costs for taxpayers, real skin in the game for providers, and faster broadband access for consumers. The results speak for themselves. Take Louisiana. Under its benefit of the bargain approved plan, Louisiana will connect over 127,000 locations around the state at a cost of just under $500 million, down more than $220 million from the plan conditionally approved during the Biden administration, and over $850 million below its original allocation. Under the prior administration's strict fiber mandate, the cost to serve a single location in Louisiana was as high as $120,000. That's enough to buy a home in many parts of the state, and roughly twice Louisiana's median household income. Imagine explaining to the family living there that Washington thinks it's better to give a company $120,000 to build broadband to their home than to give that household 2 years of income in cash. It's simply unreasonable to expect taxpayers to foot that kind of bill, especially when the outcome wasn't based on the law in the first place. Under the benefit of the bargain reforms, the highest cost location in the state is now about $7,000, with an average per location cost under $4,000. That's still a lot of money, but it's an amount that can be explained to ordinary Americans. And Louisiana's private matching contributions jumped from the statutory minimum of 25% to over 42%, a shift that can only be explained by the benefit of the bargain reforms. That increase in skin in the game, driven by increased competition, is an encouraging sign that these projects are at lower risk of default. We saw similar gains in West Virginia, a 10% increase in private match, and a 43% drop in costs as compared to their pre-benefit of the bargain plan. They were able to reach these results while still achieving universal broadband access in a way that meets the state's unique terrain and connectivity challenges. And this is consistent with nationwide trends in the program, where states are seeing average matches approaching 40%. In Georgia, providers are matching more than 170% of federal dollars. That's an astonishing figure, rivaled only by the state coming in $1 billion under its original allocation. These successes are thanks to a surge in participation. Providers who sat out under hostile, burdensome rules came back to the table, strengthening competition and improving value for taxpayers. And don't just take my word for it. According to the Arizona State Broadband Office Director, their state saw 40% more applications under the benefit of the bargain round. Virginia revealed that it received double the applications under the benefit of the bargain than under the previous rules. States freed from unlawful one-size-fits-all mandates could evaluate projects on a granular basis and select those that truly fit their needs. Indeed, our results show huge diversity in state technology mixes, both within and across states, reflecting the realities of our country's geographic, topographic, and population density differences, as well as our guiding principle of market-driven technological innovation. Today, we'll be posting state-by-state data on technology selections, costs, and average match amounts on NTIA's website, so you can see how each state applied our rules to its specific on-the-ground circumstances, with states like Rhode Island leaning more on fiber, others like Nebraska leaning more on fixed wireless, and some like Montana leaning more on satellite. Our reforms have even saved time. Under the prior rules, Texas was the last state to submit its initial proposal to NTIA, and its final proposal would not have been due until November 21st, 2025. Instead, through NTIA's acceleration efforts and Texas's diligent work to deliver a responsive, high-quality application, the state beat this deadline by nearly a month. NTIA was able to approve the plan quickly, shaving an estimated 6 months off Texans' wait time for broadband. NTIA has been working around the clock to approve as many states as possible by year's end. Last month, we announced 18 approvals, with Texas and West Virginia following soon thereafter. Today, we are adding 9 more to the list: South Dakota, Nebraska, New Jersey, Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio. I am thrilled by this momentum and eager to complete the remaining reviews. We're getting the job done at a fraction of the cost. In fact, we estimate the benefit of the bargain savings will ultimately reach $21 billion. Naturally, the $1 million, or rather $21 billion question is, how will we use these savings? First and foremost, these dollars belong to the American people, and they should reap the benefit. We didn't work, and the states didn't work just as hard as they did just to spend the savings wastefully. Any spending must produce real, measurable value, not duplicate investment the private sector is already making. Second, and just as importantly, we must avoid actions that distort investment or stifle innovation. We saw the consequences of distorted investment with the prior administration's fiber mandate. Preferencing a single technology doesn't just waste money. It can stifle innovation and undermine America's leadership in critical emerging sectors. And in a world where technological dominance and national security go hand in hand, domestic policies shouldn't be viewed in a vacuum. Policies that handicap American companies don't just limit connectivity, but have real international consequences, especially as other countries seek to follow our lead. Our approach to the BEAD savings will complement the program and reflect the same principles that made the reform successful. We haven't made any decisions yet, but stay tuned. We'll have much more to share in early 2026. Speaking of distortionary incentives and second-order effects, I want to pivot to another topic that is both critical to our nation's future and personally meaningful to me. At my nomination hearing, I outlined 3 priorities as administrator: course correcting BEAD, advancing commercial spectrum access, and addressing kids' excessive screen time. As a mom of 6, the issue of screen time is deeply personal. Like many parents, I struggle firsthand to monitor and limit my kids' internet and screen use. It's hard enough to manage at home, especially with the ever-present social pressures to be online and the addictive pull of screen time. But it's even harder when screens have become inescapable at school and so much homework now requires internet or device use, built on the premise that connected technology is the backbone of modern education. That mindset accelerated during COVID, when remote learning pushed the school day onto a screen and nonstop device use became a substitute for in-person teaching. And even though the country has long since moved past lockdowns, many of the habits and influences of that period remain. Students tethered to devices, digital platform-based lesson plans, and expansion of technology and learning as a default. A popular, yet rarely challenged talking point in certain tech and telecom circles is that schools simply need more bandwidth, more devices, more connectivity for classrooms, homework, and according to some, even on school buses. A surprise to anyone who has ever been on a school bus. There's an oft-repeated claim that more devices and more connectivity will, quote, close the homework gap and level the playing field for low-income students. These assumptions deserve real scrutiny. Technology has a role to play in education, of course, but many parents worry rightly that their children are being inundated with screens in ways that are indiscriminate and harmful to their development. This concern transcends politics. It cuts across communities, income levels, and political affiliations. The track record shows that in cases of heavy reliance on EdTech, the students who struggle most are often the very low-income kids these tools were supposed to help. While much of the public debate has focused on banning cell phones in schools, an important conversation to be sure, the problem is far broader than that. The primary drivers of screen exposure in classrooms today aren't smartphones. They're school-issued laptops and tablets, education platforms, and digital curricula that embed hours of screen time into both the school day and homework. Even if every cell phone disappeared tomorrow, the core issue would remain. Surveys show even elementary and middle school students spending 3 or more hours per day on devices for schoolwork and homework. It's routine in certain districts to give kids laptops starting as early as 1st or 2nd grade. Some schools introduce tablet-based learning as early as kindergarten. When screen time becomes the default for instruction, downtime, and homework instead of a targeted and intentional tool, it displaces the things children need most: reading, writing, physical and creative play, hands-on learning, and face-to-face interaction. Moreover, security and filters are rarely foolproof. Many teachers report that students are playing games, instant messaging, or accessing inappropriate content during school hours on school-issued devices. And it's as schools have been flooded with technology, academic performance hasn't improved. According to the National Assessment of Education Progress, the nation's report card, high schoolers' math and reading scores are at their lowest levels on record. Parents feel overwhelmed and outmatched by the social and academic pressure pushing their kids to be constantly online while lacking the tools and transparency they need to protect them. Addressing this challenge will be a major priority for me as NTIA administrator. That's why today I am announcing an NTIA-led effort to put children first when it comes to screen time in school. We want to empower parental control, increase transparency, and promote healthy tech use. NTIA is uniquely situated to convene federal agencies, subject matter experts, and creative ideas at the intersection of tech policy and children's well-being. We are coordinating across the administration and talking with leading experts. We will also be looking closely at how federal subsidies and connectivity targets may be pushing schools toward more device use, often without asking whether it helps children learn. We've all heard the shiny promises that EdTech platforms will automatically capture and analyze student data to improve instruction, that gamified apps will transform engagement, that teachers can use tablets for classroom management and improving behavior, and that connected devices will enable anytime, anywhere learning. Tech companies chasing taxpayer dollars say all this and more to close a deal, but our students are worth more than their sales pitch. NTIA has no authority to set educational policy, but NTIA does have a role in reviewing whether federal spending on broadband and connected technology in the name of education has fulfilled its mission. Federal dollars should be tied to outcomes that support children guided by parents and teachers. Technology should empower families, not undermine them. It should enhance learning, not encourage addictive habits. At its core, this is about protecting childhood. Children need less time glued to a screen and more time outdoors for building relationships and learning to manage anxiety and boredom. I admit there is no easy answer here. Connectivity is part of modern life, and many students will go on to create extraordinary things using digital skills. But we can do better, and we want to do our part to help. That work begins with listening. On December 10th, NTIA will host a virtual listening session to explore the drivers and consequences of excessive screen use in schools. We want to hear from parents, teachers, and students. We want to hear from experts on how federal policy intersects with children's technology use. If you have insights, now is the time to add your voice. We will use this feedback to inform our analysis of screen use in schools, the role of federal rules and incentives in shaping device and platform markets, and the practices of edtech platforms, particularly regarding children's data. There is no better test of a government or a society than how it treats its children. That means being honest about what works, what doesn't, and what best supports learning. The era of throwing money at problems and hoping for the best is over. We are committed to a better approach, one that puts children, their well-being, and their education at the center of every decision. If you share that commitment, we welcome the opportunity to work with you. These are just two of the many issues we are focused on at NTIA. We are also pressing ahead on our spectrum mandate from the One Big Beautiful Bill, promoting U.S. leadership in 6G across standards bodies and international fora, and evaluating the next steps for public safety communications as Congress considers FirstNet reauthorization. My first 6 months at NTIA have been incredibly busy, and the next year promises to be even more so. In 2026, I look forward to seeing BEAD dollars in action as we finally shift from approving state final proposals to getting shovels in the grounds and outlining how states can put their significant benefit of the bargain savings to work. We will also begin the year with a broad tribal consultation as we bring our tribal connectivity programs in line with BEAD. Finally, I foresee a busy year on the international front as we finalize and build support for U.S. positions ahead of the 2027 World Radio Communication Conference. I look forward to working with many of you as we take on these challenges together. Thank you.
Arielle, thank you so much for that. It was terrific in so many different ways, but if I can just say a couple things before we turn to our commenters here. As someone who's watched NTIA for decades, really, I think what you've accomplished really in the short time you've been there has been truly amazing. So thank you for that. It's not only amazing, but it's so important. Many of the things that you've done, just for example, with the BEAD program, are things that I know at the Free State Foundation that we've advocated for several years to try and have changes in policy, like abandoning the preference for fiber and not overbuilding and not having net neutrality mandates and things like that you've come in and really rectified. It's been really important what you've already accomplished. The other thing I want to say is I'm really excited by the initiative you announced regarding trying to reduce screen time. To me, that seems like it's really important, and I commend you for undertaking that and hope it's able to bear some fruit. I know, again, at the Free State Foundation, we argued against the FCC extending subsidies to school buses and some other places. Number one, because I don't think the FCC had authority, but number two, having ridden in school buses myself as a youngster and observed school buses, it's hard for me to believe that really much education was going to take place, and that was a proper use of funding. I think that's an important initiative, and thanks for announcing it. So here's what we're going to do now. I'm going to turn to Mike and Deb, and I've asked them to offer comments, reactions for 5 or so minutes. Administrator Roth can feel free if she wants to, or she doesn't have to jump in and respond to anything they say. Maybe they'll even have a conversation that gets going. And then after that, we're going to take a few questions from the audience. So that's the plan. I think I'll first turn to Deborah. I think when I introduced Deb, I may have given her shrift than I intended, but I should announce her title. So you have that. She's Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs at Citizens Against Government Waste. And so, Deb, why don't you start us off, and then we'll turn to Mike.
Thank you. So Citizens Against Government Waste has been tracking the BEAD funding applications since the initial guidance was issued during the Biden administration. And just seeing the speed in which the applications under the new guidance has been happening is just tremendous. I'm very excited personally. That's my own personal thing, to see Ohio was granted its application today. That's very excited for me, coming from Ohio, particularly in a rural area in Ohio, and knowing the importance of connecting the unserved and underserved, not just in rural Ohio, but in other states as well. Just seeing how quickly that's happening, but not only that, seeing how the benefit of the bargain has worked so well in allowing states to redo their programs, to allow more technology, and find and generate savings is a tremendous boon for taxpayers across the country. Because under the prior administration, we were just seeing more and more money being spent, starting to wonder even if the $42 billion was going to even be enough to provide for the unserved, particularly in areas where fiber may not be the answer to connectivity. So just seeing how more vendors are participating, more technologies are available for broadband deployment is really tremendous.
First of all, thank you to Randy for having me. Obviously, I didn't do a too terrible job when Commissioner Trustee was here, so he invited me back, and I appreciate that. I must say that I haven't been feeling great. This Irishman went to England for Thanksgiving, which is obviously a mistake, and came back with what the technical term I think is tummy trouble. So if you have any tomorrow, it's not because of me, okay? Last time I was here, I did make a joke about Tom Wheeler, and I just wanted to know, Tom, if you're out there, you are still loved, and I'm part of that group, okay? I think some people took that offensively, and I was joking at the time. So it's that, and then one more piece of housekeeping. Administrator Roth is not just a wonderful government servant. She is someone I was blessed to have worked with in my office. I never say she was an employee and I was employer. That's not how it worked. We were all on the same plane, and I was guided by her brilliance on so many different issues. She's a leading conservative mind on communication policy and will be for the rest of her career. In fairness, I do appreciate that after my office disappeared, she spent a number of good years on my own stomping grounds. And I'm obviously a homer in the U.S. Senate, and got quite the experience in the legislative process, which I consider one of the best that can be had. So then I should say I'm biased about NTIA. Many of you may not remember, but 1995 or 96, I spent a great deal of time with some old Hill folks trying to get rid of NTIA. So I'm not the biggest NTIA fan out there. And when Administrator Roth told me she was heading in that direction, I think she'll share with you my reaction wasn't as most positive as it could have been. I wasn't as supportive as you can imagine, but I've grown to appreciate the great work that she has done and she talked about today. So let's talk a little bit about her comments, and I'll give some observations on BEAD. It's not just about the savings. It's not about the money. I am certainly appreciative of the money that's going to be saved, $21 billion. I certainly appreciate the effort to be mindful of how those dollars may not be spent. And I've been outspoken on this, that we should return them to the Treasury at a nation that's $38 trillion in deficit. If we don't need to spend money on broadband, we probably shouldn't. And that's an important faction. So we should shift the money back to the Treasury. But I know I have in my heart that she's going to do very good in however the dollars are spent. She's very modest in her comments, I think. And she's personally saved the BEAD program in my mind. It was headed down a terrible direction. It was unlawful, it was expensive, and it was burdensome. And I think she's corrected all of those things under the Secretary's leadership and really put it on solid ground to move forward. It reminds me of the Some of you are probably too young for this, but it reminds me of the $6 million man, where you faster, cheaper, compliance with the law, right? That's what I find so impressive with what she's been able to do. There was concern that NTIA would get bogged down in this process and not be able to approve the state applications. Today, we just got another 9 states. We're at 29 plus. And as she indicated, more coming probably this year. That was something I anticipated, as knowing her very well and knowing what the administration wanted to do here. So I appreciate that she's added to that and given us the perspective on that as well. I certainly appreciate when we talk about compliance, and she mentioned this as well, on fiber being a wonderful technology, but it is not the only technology. And in correcting the past administration's effort certainly allows to be in compliance with the law, but also recognizes the different of terrain and topography that are out there today and what's important and how do we best serve, because that's what the program is about. BEAD is not about just a government program. How can we get dollars from A to B or C to D? It's about how do we get broadband service to unserved Americans so they can take advantage of the technology when appropriate and move from there. And that gets us to the second part of her speech on screen time for children. As someone who has little kids, they're a little older now than when you knew a couple of years ago, but they can spend as much time as I give them on screens. They can easily go 12 hours a day which we don't. We're not crazy. But they can easily do that and spend the whole weekend if we allowed them to do that and watch just the most awful programming that is out there. And so it's tough for parents. It is really tough to try and figure out how to address that problem in many different settings. I remember it becomes a factor of how do you get to solutions here. And the administrator talks about what she's going to do, and I'm so impressed by her efforts. I think there's some challenges there in turning the good work that she's going to do into some solutions. I remember a comment, and some of you may remember this, Ted Stevens, and one of the hearings I was at years ago said, I was talking about television and programming was terrible programming, and he'd say, I protect my kids at home. We're really strict. They can't watch any terrible things. And the kids would just go down to the neighbor's house and watch what they want. And that's what my kids would do. They're happy to go down to the neighbor's house and look at their screens. Now, it is absolutely appropriate to figure out, in my mind, how federal dollars are used and whether they should be limited to prevent excessive screen time. And it's certainly something that gets back to a point that Arielle and I have talked about years and years ago. What's the most important thing for education? What's the thing that will work? It's, as much as I love technology, at least in my opinion, it's not technology. It's about having a strong teacher. It's about having someone who motivates you, compels you to grab onto something and move forward. And so that to me is more important than technology. And technology can be an add-on, can be an aid, but absolutely agree we have to figure out how do we limit those screens. Now, in fairness, if some of you may know this, Arlington County has really, my kids, they've cut back on screen time at schools, and rightfully so. That's a good development, but I don't think that's universally across the nation, and the administrator's work here will be very valuable, hopefully. And I also appreciate, my last comment here, I also appreciate it's not about a morality issue. It's not about the old days of filtering and what programming goes in and out. It's really just a factor of how best that the children should be able to move forward in their education process and have screens be an additive and not a substitute for teachers. So I really appreciate the administrator's work in these areas, and I think her speech really highlighted the benefits that she's bringing to as part of this administration, the work that it is doing. So thank you very much.
Administrator Roth, would you have anything you want to respond to Mike or Deb at all?
So humbling and surreal to be part of this distinguished panel. Two thought leaders who have had a tremendous influence on me and my development as a public servant. So thank you for those very kind words. I think one thing I would just say is that our tremendous successes on BEAD are truly a team effort. The state broadband offices worked exceedingly hard. We put them on a very tight timeline. We put ourselves on a tight timeline. NTIA's career staff are extremely dedicated people and have been working around the clock to get as many states approved by the end of the year. And I'm just very grateful for the dedication and effort that's gone into making this program a success. It's a partnership between the federal government and states, and we're looking forward to getting it across the finish line. You touched on this. There's some discussion about returning the program to its statutory mission of technology neutrality and ensuring that any provider could go and make their case, that they could deliver and that they could achieve the parameters set forth in this statute. That's how the law was written, and it also reflects the guiding principle of technology neutrality that has made broadband in America so great. And also, and Deb, both of you touched on this. Deb, you mentioned the concern about making sure that we didn't run out of money, that everyone would get served. That, I think, reflects the difference in approach between this administration and the previous. The previous administration was very focused on getting fiber as far out as possible. We view BEAD's core mission as universal connectivity. And when you stray from that, then those risks arise. It reminds me of when I worked for Commissioner O'Reilly, and you were a big supporter of the RAF, the Remote Areas Fund, because the concern was that if you don't serve the hardest to serve areas and you take off the easier to serve areas, those most hard to serve areas get left behind. And so that's definitely been an influence on how we've approached BEAD and attempted to get it in line with the laws as enacted. Mike, you touched on that there's been a big focus on how much money we're saving, and it's not just about savings. It's also about protecting innovation and ensuring that we're following the law. I totally agree that the savings shouldn't be viewed in a vacuum. Saving money is important, but it's not the only objective in returning the program to the benefit of the bargain reforms. It's also about ensuring that we don't create harmful distortionary consequences on investment when we put our thumb on the scale towards one technology that can have second order consequences for investment and innovation. And I touched on this in my speech when we're fighting for our global technology leadership that can have second order consequences. I'm really grateful for your remarks. We're currently plowing ahead to get as many states approved as quickly as possible. Obviously, we have to look under the hood of all of the state proposals, do careful oversight and scrutiny to ensure that the projects are complying with our rules and that we're protecting taxpayer investment. But that certainly is, I think what we've accomplished shows that's not inconsistent with a speedy process and getting things done expeditiously. Really proud of what we've accomplished so far, really proud of what the states have accomplished so far, and looking forward to the months ahead.
You should be proud of what you've accomplished so far. I know in the history of this period, it's written about broadband, and it will be. It's an important subject for our country, broadband deployment and how it's done. That the turning point that took place under your leadership and the Secretary's leadership will be a really important part of that story. So what I want to do, I want to ask a couple questions, and then, as I said earlier, Arielle's agreed to take a few questions from the audience, and then we'll wrap up. But before I forget, I want to thank, as I always do, but once in a while I forget, I want to thank Kathy Baker, our events coordinator, who's been with the Free State Foundation for almost all of its existence, not quite. And I want to thank my wife, who's been with the Free State Foundation for all of its existence, and more than that, they both play an important role in making these events the success they are. So join with me in thanking those two, if you would. Okay, and then Arielle, I'm going to ask you this question because you haven't really talked about it yet, but I know it's part of your responsibility. And that is the coordinator, really, or manager, I might not be using the right technical terms, but of federal spectrum. You mentioned spectrum in your initial remarks without having a chance to talk about it. But maybe you can talk with us a bit about how that function that you play that's so important is going. A lot of us in this room are familiar with some of the incidents over the years, the last 5 10 years, whatever, where issues have arisen when there hasn't really been coordination and had to be delays in making use of a spectrum and so forth. Talk about your coordination role, if you could, and how things are going in that regard.
Thanks, Randy. That's correct. We manage federal spectrum assignments statutorily, and that requires a lot of coordination with other federal agencies who are incumbents, requires a lot of coordination with the FCC when it comes to spectrum matters that affect federal operations. We're working really closely with the FCC on the upcoming upper C-band auction. I think what I've seen is that through OB3, we've had to work with our federal agency counterparts. We're on a very tight deadline to identify the first tranche of federal spectrum to be reallocated from federal to commercial use. That requires a great deal of coordination. We are working on studies. We worked all throughout the shutdown on preparing band studies for other federal agencies, 2.7 and on 4 gigahertz. We coordinate with other federal agencies on spectrum studies and on technical matters. But I think that at a deeper level, there's been a realization over the last few months and years that we really need to row in the same direction, that America's technology leadership and spectrum leadership is an extension of our national security. It's really one and the same, and that we need to be working together to ensure America's technology dominance and dominance in the next generation of technologies like 6G. And I've seen a change in the approach of some of the federal agencies I've been working with. We've been working really closely with Department of War, the intelligence community, with others in the building. There's 2 incumbents in the 2.7 band. NOAA is one of them, and they're in our building. And we've had great conversations with them, great conversations with FAA. But ultimately, and we're also beginning to have good conversations on 4 gigahertz band. So there are 15 different federal incumbents in that band. It's a little bit more complicated, but so far we've had great discussions with DOJ, which is the second largest user, and DOW, which is also a major incumbent. Our progress is a little more advanced on 7 gigahertz, but we're really working on all of these together with our federal agency counterparts, really aware of the existential need to lead on 6G wireless technology. And we're also working with the State Department and the White House and the FCC on establishing our international positions on spectrum early so that we can go into international standard setting bodies with a clear position and as soon as possible so that we can really rally our allies. This really requires a lot of coordination and cooperation, requires establishing relationships and trust. And so far, there's been a huge, I think, a change in how federal agencies are approaching this issue. And I'm really quite optimistic about what the future holds and our ability to be united on spectrum matters.
Thank you. You actually anticipated a bit my second question, so I'll just ask it in maybe modified form. But I wanted to ask you about the upcoming the World Radio Conference, and there's the role that NTIA plays, and you were beginning to touch on that, but it also involves state and FCC and so forth. But also there's been concern among a lot of people about the fact that it's being hosted in China and the particular issues that may be presented by the fact that it's there and how that's going to affect the U.S. approach and so forth. And to me, that's an important issue. So talk to the extent you can about that and the role that NTIA plays in the upcoming conference.
Yeah, I think that our partners that we're working with really want to avoid the mistakes of the past where the U.S. positions weren't organized and clear in advance of the previous WRC. We want to avoid that, and we're working together, having meetings and conversations on going in with strong positions on defending the U.S. position on 6 gigahertz, We designated 6 gigahertz for unlicensed use during the first Trump administration. Some of our adversaries have been promoting a different approach on that band. And so working with State Department, White House, and FCC is really critical to ensuring that our position carries the day at WRC. And we need to be strategic about that. And so I think that applies to other INC bands also. WRC 27 is going to be very satellite heavy. And we're having great conversations on working on preparation for the host country agreement. As you mentioned, there's challenges about the location of the next WRC, but we're here to face them and really put our best foot forward.
Okay. We're going to take just a couple questions before we wrap up. I'll say what I always say, that please ask a question and don't try and give a speech here. And I'm going to try and enforce that. Okay, I'm going to call on Drew Clark here first. Why don't you identify yourself for purposes of the record here? Everyone who asks a question. Okay, Drew.
Thank you for being here, Assistant Secretary. My name is Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. You made a statement suggesting that states will be able to spend, or how they will spend, the $21 billion in savings, I guess unfortunately named non-deployment funds. Could you just speak to, under the revived program, the revived BEAD program, how you view the non-deployment funds? You did mention two things: they belong to the American people and they need to provide value, and that they can't distort innovation. But what have you articulated about the things for which states will be able to use these $21 billion?
Yeah. So personally, I prefer to call it BEAD savings because this amount of money is something that, as I said, the states should truly be proud of. They worked so hard to achieve this. And we're currently, no final decisions have been made. Guidance will be forthcoming. We've been laser focused on getting the deployment side of the program finalized because really that's the core mission of BEAD. We're operating under the assumption that the states will get to use their BEAD savings. But again, nothing has been finalized. But I can assure you that once we have guidance on this issue, you'll definitely hear about it.
Okay. Have any other questions for the administrator? Anyone else have a question? I'm going to let it go in about 5 seconds here.
I'll ask another one.
It's got to be as good as the first one, though.
All right.
You did it.
Could you just speak to what your first thoughts are on finding the 800 megahertz or the 500, I think, that you're responsible for of the 800? What are your best candidates for where that's going to come from?
In September, NTIA hosted a Spectrum Policy Symposium, and it was a really successful event and actually brought together a lot of different agencies, which I'm told is pretty unprecedented in the history of Spectrum Policy Symposiums past. I think really exhibited that trend that I was mentioning before to Randy about the sea change in the approach of federal incumbents when it comes to freeing up spectrum and the critical need for that as a matter of national security. At that symposium, we announced the bands that we're going to be looking at to get to 500. And actually, we identified 5 megahertz right off the bat. So those bands are 7 gigahertz to 7.125 to 7.4, 4.4 to 4.94, and 2.7 to 2.9, 1.675 to 1.695. We're looking at all the bands concurrently. Some of the bands have more work done. There's already SRF funding available for 7 gigahertz. As I said earlier, 4 gigahertz is going to be challenging, but we're very optimistic about that band and think it could be a real boon for the country and for the world. But there's 15 different agencies in that band, and so it's complicated. But we're full steam ahead. As I said, we were preparing study plans for the agencies during the shutdown, and so we're going to be working hard on those in the months ahead. And then, 2.7 to 2.9 gigahertz is a really exciting band as well. And there's 2 incumbents there, and we're having really fruitful discussions. When it comes to where we're getting it from. We're really excited about meeting our deadline. It's coming up really fast, but we're looking forward to leveraging these beds to meet our target and hopefully beat it.
Okay. I first met Drew probably a quarter century ago or more when he was a technology reporter. And he's probably the only person here I would give 2 questions to because we've been friends for so long. Okay. Last question. Now, we're going to do 2 more since you raised your hand. This will be it. Rick, you raised your hand first, and then Matt, and then we'll wrap it up. Rick Lane.
Hi, Rick Lane. I advise child safety groups and parents groups on tech policy. So very excited. I was not expecting to hear about your screen time and what you're doing there. Can you just provide a little bit more detail of how groups that I work with can gain access to what you're putting together, the websites and things like that? There's a lot of parents out there at a hearing right now talking about these issues. So they would love to learn more. And a lot of them have actually been talking about this virtual town hearing.
That's great. As a parent, as a mom of 6, it's something that I'm very passionate about and really excited about spending some of our focus on. And I think it's an issue that's very important to many of the other parents in the room who face the same challenges. The listening session is on December 10th. There's a Federal Register notice that was published, I believe it was Friday, and we're happy to follow up with you with the link. And so that's our first step, is convening experts for a virtual listening session. And, there's an email address that you can contact for questions and for participation purposes. So it's great to hear about your interest in the project, and we're really enthusiastic about it as well.
Rick, thanks for that. And Arielle, Rick really has been involved in this for a long time, so I'm glad he was here to hear about that. Now, Matt, you asked the final question. If you identify yourself.
Matt Danneman, Communications Daily. Real quick, on the screen time issue, like you indicated, NTIA doesn't set educational policy, but I guess I'm wondering, as you sit here today, are there particular federal subsidies or federal policies that you anticipate giving a harder look at? Are there ones that raise concerns for you personally as you sit here right now?
As I said, NTIA has a convening role. We're an advisor. We bring together other agencies. We want to hear about others' experiences in this area, and sharing through a listening session is the first step. I've worked on telecom policy. I worked at the FCC. I worked on universal service for years. And so that's an area that I'm more intimately familiar with. I definitely think that some of the efforts to expand kids' unsupervised access to screens during the previous administration were a wake-up call for me. So definitely something that I think that we should take a hard look at, but certainly not limited to that. I think looking at the market in general and what are the forces that are pushing screens into schools, whether it's subsidies, whether it's rules, or whether it's other marketing, I think is really worth a close look. And so we're taking an open mind in terms of what creative solutions might be out there.
Okay, Arielle, I said when I was introducing you that when I first met you, 2 decades ago or whatever, that I had that sense then, that intuition that wow, this person is going to really go on to do important things in communications policy. And you've really done that, despite working for Mike for a few. I'm only kidding. That was another important step, really, in your career. And then, of course, over in the Senate, and especially with Senator Cruz, whom I admire. I think you've shown everyone here today your mastery of your job. And I know that it gives me and others a lot of confidence for the things to come. Anyone that can start talking about this gigahertz band and that get right down to the decimal points, that's impressive. Thanks very much for being here. And everyone here, I hope, will join in thanking you for what you brought.